have an Insiders member, Maximilian, who always asks fantastic questions. And so tonight he has a question that I know you're going to love, Dr. Steve. It is, what is law?
Maximilian. Oh, Maximilian. What is law? Let me see. Well, let's go biblically. Let's root it in our Judeo-Christian heritage here.
But first, gang, did you know that the latest data from the American Heart Association indicates that adults with fatty liver are 3.5 times more likely to have heart failure than those without? And did you know that according to the American Liver Foundation, as many as 100 million Americans have fatty liver? Gang, that's you, that's me. We can't save America if we don't take care of ourselves. Our livers are our body's master detoxifier. But after decades of wear and tear, our livers slow down and become sluggish. I mean, this is why so many of us struggle with weight gain and feeling tired all the time. But gang, fortunately, there's a simple, all-natural solution. Liver Health Formula contains 12 powerful botanicals clinically proven to recharge and protect your liver at the cellular level. It helps restore your liver's detoxifying abilities. It boosts your energy levels, and it works remarkably well to fight that horribly fatty liver. Liver Health Formula is backed by proven science and approved by America's doctors. And the best part, gang, is every bottle is manufactured right here in the good old US of A. And if you click on that link below right now, you could try Liver Health Formula completely risk-free and receive 5 free gifts when you order today. So don't wait. Click on that link below or go to getliverhelp.com/Turley right now to claim your risk-free supply of Liver Health Formula and all 5 bonus gifts. That's getliverhelp.com/Turley.
Law, in the biblical sense, brings about a personal and social order that calls on all of us to trust in the promises and provisions of God. So interestingly, the law is not, the biblical law is not just arbitrary commands. Biblical law are all calls in some way, shape, or form to trust in the promises and provisions of God. We don't steal because we trust God's going to provide for us, right? We don't commit adultery because we trust in God's plan for our highest happiness in family as he defines it. We have no other gods before us because we trust that the true God, the living God, Yahweh, is going to provide for all of our needs. That's the Jewish conception of law that is then ultimate, and the Christian outworking is fulfilled in Christ, who is the end, or the telos of the law, the goal, the purpose. Now all trust in God is found in and through and expressed ultimately in Christ. So that's law in its biblical sense, and then law in its outworking of that in Western civilization or in Byzantium, when in places that are trying to enact biblical law in their own cultural instantiation, those become extensions ultimately of that call to trust in God's provisions. It's very interesting because laws are in effect obligations, ideally, obligations and responsibilities that we have that transcend and therefore are able to temper our own personal inclinations. So what's so fascinating is when I say, if I were to say to Hannah, I promise you that we will have Insiders Club next Tuesday, something like that. I've now bound what happened in that expression. They're called performatives. What I just said wasn't true. It's not like Hannah could say, "Oh, well, let me confirm that was already in the books," or something like that. Because that's not how a promise works. A promise works by me creating the reality. No, I promise you that as of now, next Tuesday, we'll have an Insiders Club meeting. What I've just done is I've created reality. I've created a scenario now where we're all going to gather together on Tuesday. I changed reality through something we call a promise. And what that does is it binds me now to an obligation. And because failing to fulfill your obligations is universally denounced and derided as immoral, then what obligations in effect do is they temper my inclinations, my disposition, my own personal subjective wants and needs are subjected to this larger social reality that I've helped create through the promise. And that's what laws are supposed to do. Is they're supposed to bind us and obligate us to certain behaviors that extend beyond our personal subjective disposition. So I may subjectively want to punch somebody because of what they said or did, right? Mike Pence or whatever, right? Something, but I can't because I'm bound by subjective transcending obligations that law ends up creating. And ideally, those subjective transcending obligations reflect a moral center where we trust in a being higher than ourselves to provide us for our highest goodness. So that's what the classical conception of law is. We don't live in that conception of law now. We live in a conception of law that's known as positivist law. So what I just described for you sees law as something we discover. It's out there because the world is filled with moral obligations, and then our laws are supposed to reflect those subjective, transcendent moral obligations and responsibilities and the like. But in a modern, liberal, secular world, law is totally invented, and it's called positivist law. Positivist law is law that is simply posited by the person who has the power to posit over you. And so we're no longer interested in trying to discover God's law or the divine law or, nature and nature's God, as our framers would put it. We're now interested solely in implementing laws that benefit the permanent political class, that benefit the wealthy, that benefit billionaires and bureaucrats. They create the laws. And then by definition, because they're not being discovered, by definition, they're above the laws. The laws never apply to them. They only apply to you. And those laws are used to reconfigure political, economic, social life in such a way so as to always, always benefit them. So the solution to that is to go back to what we call natural law. We go back to, and that's why I think the rise of Christian nationalism is so exciting, because in many respects, we're going back to more of a classical conception of law, rooted in a true conception of justice that ultimately calls us to trust in a divine source of truth, goodness, and beauty. So there you go. That's my definition of law on the cusp.
So that kind of definition of law seems to be the antithesis of what our modern idea of freedom would be. So how do you define freedom? We talk a lot about faith, family, and freedom, but where does that play a role in that framework that you just presented?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Isaiah Berlin, the Harvard philosopher, would say freedom has to have two elements to it. There's a positive freedom and a negative freedom. So we generally, in the modern age, we only think of freedom in one sense. That's negative freedom. It's a freedom from. So it's a freedom from coercion, or freedom from tyranny, or what have you. That's fine. That can be good, but that could also be horrible. Everybody knows the petulant teenager who says, you never let me do anything, right? That's purely negative freedom. Or even worse, like the pro-abortion activists or LGBT activists, keep your laws off my body and all that sort of stuff. What they miss is what's called positive freedom. And positive freedom is not a freedom from. Positive freedom is a freedom for. In other words, we've been given volition, wills, agency to be able to freely do what we ought. So there are things we know, and this is what's killing our cities today in our urban environment. There are things we simply can't legislate. I can't require you. I could pass a law against, say, racism, but I can't pass a law that makes you like it, right? This is what Lord Acton referred to as the obedience to the unenforceable. I can require you, if I run a restaurant, I could require you to be there on time, but I can't require you to have a good attitude. Those things you just can't really enforce. Those are dispositions, inclinations that come only because we recognize we're free precisely to be what we ought to be. So we don't simply just strive for, righteousness. We hunger and thirst for righteousness, right? We don't just strive for truth, we love truth. And so that's where the notion of virtue comes in. Virtue is the right ordering of our love. So we love what's truly lovely and desire what's truly desirable. So again, going back to the scriptures, the way the serpent fooled Eve, tempted Eve, and got Eve to sin, is he tempted her with a false desire. Her desires were out of whack. When the Genesis 3 says she desired knowledge, and the fruit looked pleasurable and pleasing to the eyes. It's all aesthetic, language there. And so what Satan convinced her of was that the desiring of God as her ultimate point of reference for happiness and life and light and so on got replaced by a different desire. Desire didn't get replaced. A different desire that was much lower. She treated something else as God. She was listening to an animal. She then tells Adam what to do, right? It's for the natural order is God, man, woman, animal, just in terms of the structure and so forth. And then what we see in the fall is the total reversal. Animals are on top, calling the shots. Then the woman is telling the man what to do, and God's completely forsaken. And so how does God reorder the world? He reorders the world redemptively through the law, through Moses and the law by his grace, of course, but through the law. And what's the ultimate call of the law? The ultimate commandment? Love, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbors as yourself. Love rightly. Desire rightly. He's restoring our desire. And so that's what true freedom is. True freedom is to have virtue. That's why our founding fathers believed we were a republic of virtue. You don't have true freedom without virtue, without self-governance, right? And you don't have true virtue without faith. So they believe you had to find virtue rooted in a faith tradition, because you don't make this stuff up. It's something that you discover. But you don't have true faith without freedom, right? I can't coerce you into faith, but you don't have true freedom without virtue, which requires faith, which requires freedom. That's what's known as their golden triangle of freedom. So there you go. We could keep going. As you can see, I spent 18 years in a classroom talking about this stuff. So anyway.
Well, not many political commentators talk about this deep, rich angle of it. So
that's why we have our Insiders Club. You got it.
Exactly. I was going to say that I saw on the 4th of July a few kids wearing shirts that were saying "free to be me" in red, white, and blue, and I was like, "That's not the point!" Oh my gosh, so stupid.
Not the point. Right. You're free to be what you ought to be. Exactly. What are you called to be? Exactly.
Exactly.